Ghosts of a Memory by Phoenix Boy. Chapter 30. Are you sure, Albus? James asked one Saturday morning, a couple of weeks later. He was standing in front of the desk in the headmaster's office, earnestly trying to deny that, as Albus argued, he needed a holiday. The portraits around him were shouting out their own views, which both of them ignored with the ease of long practice. I'm happy enough staying to help you keep an eye on things. Albus smiled at him, the proud smile of a mentor who knows that his protege is completely serious about this. His heart just as pure as it appears.
My child, I have been headmaster in this school for about 50 years now, and taught at it for close to 100. Don't you feel that I can look after myself for less than 2 days? Of course, but no buts, Harry. You go and take some time off to see your family.
My family?
Aren't they among those you'd count? Family is a blessing you understand the value of. Go on, don't worry about me. The school will still be standing when you return.
A large proportion of my family is here, actually. But okay, since you're sure you'll be okay. James agreed reluctantly. It wasn't that he thought Albus wasn't completely competent, but he was getting old, even for a wizard, and if something happened when he wasn't there... James's eyes met the blue ones of his old teacher, and they smiled, knowing and acknowledging the depth of their friendship. Content now, James turned and went back down to the dungeons. Albus watched him go, his smile sad now. As with many ancient and powerful wizards, it was given to him to feel when his time was approaching, and it was. He would have embarked on the next great adventure before the flowers blossomed again. At his age, it might even be in bed, and he sincerely hoped it would be, if only to spare those he would leave the pain. James, meanwhile, was soon down in the now familiar dungeons, his home, as much as the Gryffindor Tower had ever been. Severus! He called, coming into their quarters. He followed the scent of breakfast and took himself through to the kitchen. Do you mind if I go and see Draco and Blaze for the weekend? If you're worried as to whether I can manage to dress myself in your absence, I suggest you pull your head out of whatever hole you buried it in, and take that as your answer. If anything happens here, I'm fairly sure that Hogwarts will make sure that you know. She will? Severus sighed, and his face assumed the expression familiar of old that he used when dealing with a small child, first year, or Harry. Hogwarts dotes on you. Everyone has been walking around in peace and tranquility as if it had been Christmas every day for months. There hasn't been a single fight bar the scuffle in Gryffindor at New Year's, and you should know by now that the castle is absent. She has feelings just like that car that Arthur Weasley animated. I am sure that if she feels threatened, you will find yourself in the Great Hall before you are even aware that there is a problem. Oh, right. Your things are over by the door if you want to leave now. James looked back the way he'd come to see a small hold all packed while he was gone. Everyone seemed to think he needed a break, so he might as well go. Even Severus had gone to the Malfoys the previous weekend and came back looking refreshed. Master James! Master James is here! Shrieked the house elf, clinging to his leg as he approached the nursery. James looked at him and began the slow process of peeling off his over-enthusiastic welcomer. Hello, Dobby, he said, well resigned to the house elf's hyperactivity by now. Dobby looked at him, beaming, then glanced from side to side as if checking for eavesdroppers. Dobby is looking after Master Harry, he half-whispered proudly. I'm sure you're really good at that, James said. He supposed Draco and Blaze knew best, but Dobby? Dobby is looking after Master Draco when he was a little master, so Dobby is knowing exactly what to do, Dobby said, still beaming. Then he said quietly and confidentially, Master Harry is a much nicer baby than Master Draco was. Master Harry is clever. James laughed. The thought of a little blonde blob with blonde hair and a pout struck him as amusing, as well as the pout the adult Draco would pull if the mention of him being a somewhat less intelligent baby than his son came up. Still, Harry was his godson after all, and with his influence, of course the child was intelligent. Where is Harry? Master Harry is in the nursery with Mistress Malfoy, Dobby said. She told Dobby to come here. Dobby can take you there now. With an uncharacteristic abruptness for a house elf, Dobby took his arm and popped popped them upstairs. While James was grateful at being spared the walk, a little warming might have been pleasant. Looking around the nursery, he could see a number of changes since his last visit. One of being the state of messiness the room was currently in, various toys, towels, and baby clothes being scattered around the room. Across the door was a firmly secured piece of cloth that rose to mid-thigh on him, presumably to keep the baby in, as Harry now realized, seeing a little bundle of clothes crawling with remarkable speed towards him across the room. Blaze, lounging on the sofa, hooked him with practiced ease and placed him back at their feet. "James!" Draco said with a smile as Dobby scooped up Harry and took him over to the far corner where they amused themselves by pulling faces at each other. Really, Dobby was nothing more than an overgrown toddler himself at times. "It's about time you came over! Severus told us you were in the attack and got wounded!" Severus fusses sometimes, James said, somewhat irritated, but mostly touched by their concern. "I was nicked a couple of times by cutting hexes, simple cuts that took an hour or so to heal up fully with a potion. I can assure you that the Death Eaters we were fighting are in much worse condition, including the vampires. They'd be in an even worse ones once my father discovered they'd failed in what he thought was a simple task. That is, if you let any of them get away." "A couple of vampires, that's it." "You didn't lose anyone, did you?" Blaze asked anxiously. "Surely Severus would have mentioned—" "He probably would have. No, everyone's fine now, though Fleur was stuck in the infirmary overnight. I noticed that Harry's crawling now." Draco beamed at him like the proud father he was. He looked much sweeter than James would have thought when he smiled that widely like a 5-year-old in a toy shop. "Harry has been crawling for 3 weeks now. He can almost beat Dobby in a crawling race as well." "A crawling race?" Draco shrugged. "Harry seems to enjoy it, and it appeals to Dobby's sense of humor. Still, he's fast, isn't he? Just watch him go. He'll be a seeker when he's older, mark my words." "Especially with our careful coaching." "Watch it, you two," Blaze warned them playfully. "I'm a chaser, and so is Severus. We'll be doing our best to stop you corrupting him." "Corrupting? Singing is the most honorable position on the pitch. The thrill of one-to-one combat, the speed, the talent, the skill." "And so modest as well. Besides, he's not touching a broomstick, even as a passenger, until he's at least 7. Draco looked horrified at the thought. "Love, I had my first broom when I was 3. You have to start early, else it isn't as natural. James, you'll back me up on that, won't you?" "I didn't even see a broom until I was 11. 11? And you're that good?" "My first captain called me a natural. By the way, when Harry's older, I'd like to buy him his first broom. As his godfather, it's my responsibility to encourage such dangerous sports as Quidditch, dueling, and dragon hunting." "Dragon hunting? I assure you, Evans, my son is not going anywhere near a dragon until he's at least 17, Draco said, looking paler than ever. "I needed a third activity. Replace it with pranking if you want. That can be dangerous, especially if he tries to prank us, or Severus." Draco and Blaze looked at him helplessly, then started laughing. A couple of hours later, Dobby looked up from his game, picked up Harry gently with a practiced ease, and brought him over. "Do masters and mistress want to have Harry now?" he asked. Without waiting for a reply, the gurgling baby was placed unceremoniously in James's arms, and Dobby vanished. "It's almost Harry's lunchtime," Blaze said by way of explanation. "I think Dobby's gone to get it ready." James looked down at the chubby face and tapped the little nose gently with his finger. Harry gurgled at him, beaming, and brought his short little arm up to feel James's forehead. Alarmed and suddenly remembering the last time it had happened, James distracted Harry quickly with a game of peekaboo. If Harry could see through the makeup or sense something, it was possible he had some sort of seeing talent. If not, it was just a baby with a knack for scaring the hell out of his poor, suffering godfather. Suddenly, Harry started whimpering, and Blaze quickly scooped him up and started soothing him while James stared at them helplessly. One moment the baby was happy, the next minute he was upset. What had he done? He got an idea a moment later. Pain shot through his body, and he screamed, falling forwards onto the floor, writhing. It felt like his whole body was on fire, that his magic was being sucked out of him. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear Blaze and Draco's concerned voices, but he couldn't respond. There was a gentle mental nudge, and it felt like the bottom of his mind had dropped out as he was sucked into a vision, the like of which he had hoped never to experience again. He was in the Great Hall at Hogwarts. There was no doubt about that, and it seemed to be lunchtime. That meant it was happening now, or, as the presence within his mind seemed to negate it, a few minutes ago. The students were cowering most under the table, and the teachers were standing in the central aisle, wands drawn. At the front of them was Albus Dumbledore, and opposite them was Lucius Malfoy, and what appeared to be his entire contingent of Death Eaters, arrayed neatly in their ranks, wands out and ready for their master's orders.
Lucius Malfoy,
Albus said, his voice steady and calm.
I must ask you to leave the grounds immediately, or I will be forced to take action.
You? Lucius sneered, disgust evident. Obviously, he was as lacking in common sense as he was in sanity. Hardly a difficult association to make.
You forget, Lucius, that it was I that defeated Grindelwald, that stood against Voldemort in both of his risings.
You, old man. Without Potter, you are nothing, and my lord finished him off. I have risen greater than either, and your time is now over.
That remains to be seen, but I am not the last or the only defender of the light,
Albus said. Maybe what he had said at the order meeting had been correct. Maybe he was resigned to death and was now trying his best to defend his school and put doubt into the hearts of the Death Eaters.
In my wake comes the heir of Slytherin and Gryffindor, and doubt not, Lucius, he will destroy you.
The self-proclaimed Dark Lord seemed a little concerned at that, then he sneered again. Lord Voldemort was the last of the line of Slytherin, and Potter was the last of the line of Gryffindor. They're both dead. The lines are ended, and if that is the best you can do, my complete victory is near. Stand aside, or die.
I cannot back down when the school is in danger,
Albus stated, still calm. James knew this to be correct. It had been part of the warding oath. He felt an itch to be there himself. So be it, old fool. Avada-kedavra! Lucius Malfoy shouted, green light spurting in a somewhat feeble approximation of the killing curse. Of course it was fighting the wards, no wonder it was weak. It sped through the air nonetheless. Albus stood there accepting it, and it struck him in the chest. For a moment James thought he had done the impossible, but then his mentor slowly toppled. A number of students screamed. The teachers were pale and white. Severus in particular looked horrified. He had looked on Albus as a grandfather, also knowing that his fate as a traitor would be worse than any others at Lucius's hands. James tore himself from the vision, filled with the need to defend Severus and the school. His eyes snapped open and he leapt to his feet, already moving. A hand went up to brush his forehead to feel that the makeup had been seared away by the magic of wards rushing through him. Draco and Blaise were staring at him, Harry clutched in her arms. Undoubtedly they could see the scar, and he knew that with his anger his eyes would be blazing with power. He could feel it roaring in his ears. No questions now. Hogwarts has been breached. Albus is dead. Lucius will be, as soon as I get my hands on him. A sweep of his wand had his hair once again at the familiar shoulder length. His robes were enlarged from his pockets and spelled on, and his wand was drawn. This ends now, he said, and did the impossible and apparated into Hogwarts. They stared at him. Death Eaters, students, and teachers alike, as he stood there over the headmaster's body, quite obviously furious. All except the Death Eaters had known James Evans, the defense professor, was a powerful man, but nothing had prepared them for this. He looked more like a demigod than a mortal man as the power spilled out of his body, making him glow with silver light. James looked down at the corpse of a man whom he had considered one of his closest confidants. He looked his years as he lay there, frail and broken. Slowly he knelt and straightened the body, closing the eyes and folding the arms over the wand on his chest. Satisfied at last, he rose to look accusingly at the Death Eaters who had dared attack one of his family. "Who are you?" Lucius managed to demand with a semblance of his normal tone. He was the only one of them unmasked, dressed in black velvet robes that were quite obviously the best money could buy, hair immaculately groomed. Obviously, life as a fugitive wasn't quite as harsh as the Ministry would have liked it to be. "Your worst nightmare," James replied, sending stunning curses at two of the Death Eaters from his bare hands. Lucius glanced at them, dismissing them as unimportant, and turned back. Your name? I'm not answering that. This is your final warning. Do your worst, boy. I, headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, banish these uninvited guests from the grounds by virtue of my magic and blood. James said, the words coming to him instinctively. As the ward holder, he was indeed acting headmaster until a new one was selected. Nothing happened. A few Death Eaters were brave enough to laugh. You see, we aren't uninvited, Lucius said, sneering. Your petty tricks won't work on us. Who was foolish enough to invite you? From behind the ranks of the Death Eaters came one slighter figure, similarly masked. With a bow to his Dark Lord, he removed his mask. It was Walter Smethly, a fifth-year Ravenclaw, and he looked like he was about to burst with pride. Traitor! Some brave student called out. Without looking, James wondered whether it was a Gryffindor or a Slytherin. Certainly the voice was familiar. You know, Walter, had you come to us, we would have protected you, he said sadly, knowing that the boy had done it willingly. I am proud to serve my master, mudblood. Language, Lucius chided lightly, mockingly. As you see, you cannot be rid of us so easily. Now will you tell us your name, so we can put it on your grave? Can't you guess, Malfoy? James asked quietly, mockingly, putting his disappointment behind him as best he could. When no answer was forthcoming, he said very slowly, very deliberately, My name, Harry James Evans Potter, heir to the line of Gryffindor by my father's grace, heir to the line of Slytherin through my mother's blood, defender of Hogwarts, and current headmaster. The hall broke out in shocked mutterings. The students were cheering. He'd given them hope when they thought they were all dead. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see the Slytherins hammering on the tables. Then James smiled a smile that made Lucius tremble in his tailored, handmade boots. Incidentally, I'm also your grandson's godfather. What? Potter? Actually, I discovered that I have something of a Slytherin side to me. I was in Merlin House at university and discovered that I get on quite well with Draco, and he gave me the honor. You know, he's named the child after me, of course. Henry Severus Malfoy. A traitor and a mudblood. How appropriate for the little blood traitors bastard. He will be taught the proper ways after I have disposed of you and my worthless offspring. Says something about your skills as a father, doesn't it? The thing is that once I am dead, you won't be able to find him, unless you happen to be Gryffindor's heir. Enough talk, Potter. As I told your predecessor, the rule of the light is over. I rule now. I would dispute that. I killed your master, the one whose feet you groveled at for years, and I can't see you as presenting a greater challenge. Look who you've brought with you. The dregs of wizarding society. Vodicadavra! Lucius said. Nothing happened, not even a spark of green light. You see, James said, teeth clenched with anger now. Although Albus was technically brilliant and relatively powerful, in terms of sheer power, I outstripped him easily. The wards are stronger than before. Your dark magic will no longer work. Light magic works as well. James ignored him, turning his back to look at the staff table, while silently erecting the strongest shield he could hold. His eyes met those of his lover, and he smiled encouragingly when he saw the look of sick worry in his face. Severs, he said lightly, I might need some of your potion after this. You know the one I mean. If you survive, that is, Lucius said, shooting a spell at his back. James spun, dropping into a crouch before he could even identify it. It had dissipated against the shield. Attacking when my back is turned, Malfoy. I'd have expected better from a pure blood. I'm a Slytherin. Are you indeed? Then I'll give you a taste of Slytherin's gift. Lucius didn't answer. His face was flushed. With anger or embarrassment, James couldn't tell. And he shouted out another spell. James stood there gathering himself, trusting in his shield. Slowly, he closed his eyes to concentrate and reached within himself for the shimmering core of magic that he had discovered, that his gift allowed him to touch and manipulate in its raw form. Slowly, he drew it out and opened his eyes again, aware that the glow around him was now blinding. Smiling with grim determination, he released the energy. A pure bolt of silver-white light shot across the small gap separating them. It hit Lucius Malfoy in the chest. When the spots cleared from everyone's eyes, they saw nothing but a pile of ashes. James. Harry turned his gaze at the Death Eaters. That was for Albus, he said blankly. Then he continued with a little more of his normal control, although he was still blazing in their eyes. I could kill you, but I won't. Unless you have a death wish, you will remain here until the orders arrived. He turned again and smiled blissfully. Task accomplished. Ouch, he said calmly. Then he collapsed and the light around him vanished. They stared at him for a moment in shocked silence. Severus was the first to shake himself out of his stupor. Students, return to your common rooms immediately. Prefects, I'm asking you to ensure that everyone remains there until order is restored, he said, the familiar voice perhaps the only thing that was keeping them from mass hysteria. They began to pour out of the hall, many of them in tears, the prefects calling out to shepherd strays back into the columns. Minerva, perhaps you could see to it that Albus's body is looked after, and someone had better call for the Aurors to deal with that lot. James? Harry? She asked quietly from where she stood beside him. We'll be in our quarters, Severus said softly, suddenly seeming subdued and helpless. From what he's told me, he's exhausted and burnt. There is nothing we could do except treat his wounds and hope. If Draco arrives, send him to Aberforth. And Smithley? Give him to the Order when the rest of them arrive and confine him to Grimmauld Place. I think Harry would be the best person to talk to him, and there's no point in putting him back into the dormitories. Even the Ravenclaws would lynch him. I'll take care of things, she said, putting a comforting hand on his arm. You look after Harry, and I'll keep them away from you. More precisely, it will be in James's room. His password is in Parseltongue, and while I have free access, no one else does. Send a house elf with food and any messages. She nodded and stepped away as the man knelt down next to his lover and, with a gentleness and strength few had ever seen in him, lifted him into his arms and pressed a chaste kiss to his forehead. Severus sighed, focusing on the task in hand to stop his tears from flowing. Albus's death so soon left a hole in him that he didn't even realize had been filled. He made his way past the rest of the staff, heading down towards the dungeons. He passed the slow-moving Slytherin column. Is it going to be all right, sir? Archie asked, genuine concern written in his face. I don't know, Severus said blankly. We can only hope. Alistair? Keep him with you. He'll only suffer if he comes with me. The prefect nodded and continued to shepherd his charges away. Severus reached their rooms, the portrait wordlessly swinging open as he approached and laid James on their bed. Deftly, he stripped the unconscious body and spread the soothing liniment into his skin. At last, he stepped back and looked at his work. You'd better recover, he half-threatened, though the half-choked sound betrayed his bantering tone. Because I don't know what the rest of us are going to do if you don't.